And I'm Steve Inskeep. Today's Up First was edited by Megan Prantz, Larry Kaplow, Rebecca Metzler, Mohammed El Bardisi, and Taylor Haney. It was produced by Ziad Butch and Mia Dumas. Our director is Christopher Thomas. We get engineering support from Zoe Van Genhoven, and our technical director is Carly Strange. Good morning, Carly. Our supervising producer is Michael Lipkin. Join us again tomorrow.
This message comes from Rosetta Stone and their newest language learning experience, Rosetta Stone Sapphire. Get unlimited access to all 25 Rosetta Stone languages and Sapphire learning tools. Visit rosettastone.com/NPR and receive 20% off. This message comes from NPR sponsor Charles Schwab with its original podcast on investing. It's hosted by Liz Ann Saunders, Schwab's chief investment strategist, and Colin Martin, head of fixed income research and strategy for the Schwab Center for Financial Research. Each week, Liz Ann, Colin, and their guests analyze economic developments and bring context to conversations around stocks, fixed income, the economy, and more. Download the latest episode and subscribe at schwab.com/oninvesting or wherever you get your podcasts. This message comes from MIDI Health. Co-founders Joanna Strober and Dr. Kathleen Jordan discuss why they started a virtual care platform to empower and educate women in perimenopause and menopause.
Historically, perimenopause and menopause have been very stigmatizing. So people haven't wanted to admit that they're in perimenopause and menopause, as though it was like embarrassing, which is insane. It's just something happening to your body. So one of the things that we're trying to do is destigmatize these topics. Perimenopause and menopause are just women's health. So we try to educate women all the time. Maybe it's your hormones, and we would like to help you.
Yeah, and I find women actually want to talk about it. It's one of the things they always comment at MIDI is that they finally feel heard. One of the ways that women find MIDI is actually from other women, and I think it's meaningful.
MIDI Health, committed to helping women in midlife with perimenopause and menopause care, accessible via telehealth visits at joinmidi.com.
The Trump administration has had enough of leaks. The Office of Personnel Management says leaks about immigration enforcement and military operations put federal agents and service members at risk. So the government has a sweeping plan for keeping lips sealed. Here's NPR's Andrew Shue.
Non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, are common in the private sector, but not in the federal government. The Trump administration wants to change that with a proposed rule out today. It would give federal agencies the option to make new and existing employees sign NDAs. Now already, privacy and ethics rules govern how the nearly 2 million people who work for the government handle information. And so, to Ray Limon,
this seems to be a new add-on that seems to be very, very broad in nature.
Limon spent nearly 3 decades working as an attorney and human resources leader in the federal government. He doesn't buy the Trump administration's arguments that NDAs are needed across the civil service. He says it's not the rank and file folks who handle the day-to-day functions of the government who are doing the leaking. Instead,
these are typically more senior individuals, typically politicals that have access to information that share it with reporters.
Perhaps the biggest disclosure of Trump's second term came when Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared plans of an imminent strike on Yemen in a Signal chat. Now, the Trump administration says the draft rule does not create, quote, new substantive restrictions on employee speech. The proposal acknowledges that federal workers can still blow the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse. Federal law protects that. Still, Limon fears NDAs could have a further chilling effect on a workforce that's already seen upheaval under Trump.
I'm just adding this to another tranche of measures that they're taking to kind of step on the throat of the employee.
Now the public has 30 days to weigh in. Rhea Shue, NPR News, Washington.
In the 1990s, kids around this country met a little pup with a big imagination.
What's the story, Wishbone? Do you think it's worth a look? It kind of seems familiar, like a story from a book.
Wishbone was a live-action PBS show that followed a Jack Russell Terrier and his owner, Joe. Wishbone would dream about classic literature and imagine himself as the main character.
Like Frankenstein.
Victor Frankenstein, a young student of science, conducted his own secret scientific experiment. It's one of the greatest monster books ever, and the scariest, the spine-tingliest, the flat-out spookiest. I'm rambling, sorry.
And Faust.
And how long do you get to keep my immortal soul?
For all eternity.
Eternity. So we mean like forever eternity. No turning back. I'm not very comfortable with that.
The crew from the show put together a new documentary about it. It's called What's the Story, Wishbone?
Joey Stewart was the first assistant director of Wishbone, the TV show, and is the director of the documentary.
Every time we meet people and work on different movies and TV shows, that's the only thing anybody wants to talk about.
Every week they needed to tell a different classic story in less than half an hour.
So we'd get a script on a Monday, we break it down and figure out what the sets we needed to build, what the cast we needed to cast, what were all the dog tricks.
Soccer was that dog. Larry Brantley was his voice.
Jackie Captain, our head animal trainer, had a hard and fast rule, which was nobody gets to pet the dog. Period, end of story. He's hyper-focused, and he can lose that focus. So we all learned pretty early on this set discipline, because we did not want to do anything that was going to pull him off focus.
Stewart says despite being a show for kids,
we weren't afraid of dark shows. Look at Joan of Arc.
Talk about a hot take. He says a lot of the crew back then were young and inexperienced.
If somebody offered me this job now, I would think they're crazy. But at the time, we didn't know any better.
30 years later, Stewart says it was one of the most important shows he's ever worked on.
I mean, the legacy of the show for me is, giving children an excitement for reading or an excitement about classic literature, and quite often forming them into what they became later in their lives, and remembering that Wishbone was a huge part of that.
What's the story, Wishbone?
the documentary airs on PBS stations starting today. So what's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone?
Are we on? Is this thing rolling? Are we? Yeah, we got it? Okay. This is NPR News.
The heat wave across Europe is setting temperature records for the month of May. Okay, some people don't want to hear it, but here it is. Scientists say this kind of springtime heat is another sign of climate change. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley reports.
Europe's cities are scorching under a heat dome of hot air pushed up from North Africa. From Rome to London, temperatures hover in the mid-90s and are predicted to top 100 in many places by the weekend. 7 deaths in France are blamed on the heat, including 2 people taking part in sporting events. Sweaty residents and tourists try to cool off in public fountains or carry sun-blocking umbrellas. Parisian Soraya Bouiza says she takes a bicycle to get air.
Et je trouve que Paris n'est pas du tout adapté aux chaleurs. Déjà, c'est une ville.
Paris is not at all adapted to this kind of heat, she says. There aren't enough green spaces, and few homes, offices, and public transport have air conditioning. When it's hot, it's hell. 2025 was Europe's hottest year in history, and 2026 is shaping up to be worse. The European Union's Earth Observation Program, Copernicus, says Europe is heating twice as fast as the world average, some 2.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Here's why. Europe abuts the Arctic, which is the world's fastest heating region. Europe's melting glaciers accelerate global warming because snow and ice reflect the sun and the bare earth absorbs the heat. And changing atmospheric circulation around the continent, like the Gulf Stream, is intensifying heat waves. Forest fires are multiplying and rivers are low. Eastern and Northern Europe are most affected. David Ferranda is a climate expert at France's National Center of Scientific Research. Speaking on News Channel France 24, he had a message for climate change skeptics.
Ouvrez la fenêtre, regardez dehors, et après, regardez les calendriers.
Open your window and then look at the calendar, he says. It's an impossible combination. You can't say, oh, it's summer, so it's hot. No, 100 degrees in the spring is the result of global warming caused by humans. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Paris.
NPR's Franco Ordonez has noticed a pattern in how President Trump talks about Iran. Trump says the war is over or almost over, then clearly it is not.
Over the weekend, the president said a groundbreaking deal with Iran was, quote, largely negotiated. A day later, he said there was no rush, while his aides indicated the deal was not done. And then on Monday, U.S. forces attacked Iranian speedboats that they said were attempting to lay mines.
So Franco Ordonez is here with us now. How many times have you seen this happen?
Yeah, it's happened at least a half dozen times dating back to late March. I mean, he's repeated several variations that a deal is close, that an agreement was largely negotiated, that a framework exists. And then, of course, it just doesn't happen. I mean, take this weekend, after almost 3 months of war, Trump was talking about an almost finalized deal that would include reopening the Strait of Hormuz. He was almost actually taking a victory lap, thanking intermediaries for their help with negotiations. And then, of course, you had the blowback from Republicans in Israel. I would say that this was the most emphatic he's been about an upcoming deal, but it's happened before. I mean, last month, Trump said they were very close to a deal and that the two sides agreed to even dig up Iran's enriched uranium. The reality is, while the president has repeatedly projected this kind of optimism, there is yet to be anything really concrete or durable toward a resolution.
Well, and now he's trying to add more things to the deal. He's pressing on more countries to join the Abraham Accords. That's the regional agreement that seeks to normalize relations with Israel. But asking for that could make reaching a deal a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it really could, as Iran sees the Abraham Accords as anti-Iran. I mean, I was talking with Matthew Kronig, who had the Iran portfolio at the Pentagon in the Obama administration. He also served under George W. Bush and Trump. You know, he says the deal is already complicated enough. It would make more sense to be used as a kind of carrot and stick approach, where you tell Iran, you'd better make this deal or else we're going to make dynamics in the region much more difficult for you by expanding the accords. But he said this actually may be more about sending a message to Israel.
One way it might make sense is if you're dealing with different audiences, and the Abraham Accords is actually aimed at Israel and Netanyahu and saying, I know you're not happy that we're on the verge of making peace with the Islamic Republic, but please stand down for now. There's something else in it for you.
And that, of course, would be a better security environment overall for Israel.
Okay, so if it's a better security environment, then why is it a hard sell to get other countries to join?
Well, the biggest obstacle is the lack of a Palestinian state. Many Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, have maintained a position that they will not normalize ties with Israel without a clear path towards creating one. And it's something that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, has said will never happen.
So how much are political pressures playing into all this?
I mean, I'd say quite a bit. Trump is facing growing pressure from various fronts to take action, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to get a handle on gas prices. Gas prices hit a new high over Memorial Day weekend. And polls show that the war is unpopular with many Americans. And Trump's approval ratings are also dropping. And Republicans worry that they could lose the majorities in the midterms, both in the House and the Senate.
That's White House correspondent Franco Ordonez. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
For more on the president's pattern of talking about Iran, peace, war, we've called up a former State Department official who worked on Iran policy in the Biden administration. Jennifer Gavito was a career State Department official who rose to near the top of the department. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so when you hear the president's rhetoric saying it's largely negotiated, actually it's not, and changing constantly, what does that do to negotiations?
I think on one hand it indicates that progress is actually being made, and I tend to think that is true here. The only way to end this conflict is through a diplomatic resolution, and those take time. I think it's important to remember that the JCPOA, the agreement from the Biden era over Iran's nuclear deal, took over 2 years to negotiate. I think at the same time, though, this may continue to suggest that there is within the Trump administration a fundamental misunderstanding of the Iranian regime and its continued adherence to its ideological red lines, because it doesn't believe it's lost this war and it doesn't think it has to compromise.
I think you're suggesting that the president overstates progress because perhaps he has convinced himself that he really has made progress until reality tells him differently?
I think he's inching towards progress. I think it's important to note that. But those last 5% of the negotiations are always the hardest. And I think that's the moment that we're in right now.
What does it do to the United States when Iranians are able to mock our president and accuse him of manipulating the stock market, which does in fact move up and down with everything he says?
Well, I think the Iranians have perhaps a far better understanding of the United States than is the case vice versa, and they certainly understand how to get under this particular president's skin.
Do we also have here an indication of divides within the administration or more broadly within the Republican Party? The president proclaims this deal, then he discovers a lot of his fellow Republicans don't like it, and so he says, no, actually there wasn't a deal.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think the president is waffling between instincts. On one hand, to cut his losses and strike whatever deal he can get in the near term to get global commerce moving again with the opening of the Strait of Hormuz in particular. If he can get progress on the nuclear deal, I think that is a benefit for him. On the other hand, I think his instinct is to wait until he can portray this as any type of strategic win for the United States, where that has proven elusive so far.
You mentioned that the president is dealing with an Iran that is very dug in on certain issues that are greatly important to the United States. I suppose the United States is also dealing with an Israel that is dug in, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has insisted, as we heard, that Lebanon isn't going to be part of this agreement, and he wants to continue his war in Lebanon. How does that complicate things?
Lebanon has a real potential to be a spoiler in this negotiation. For Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon is its most important proxy. And so therefore, Israeli attacks on Hezbollah are equated in large measure to attacks on Iran itself. And Iran is saying we can't conclude a deal as long as Israel continues to attack us. Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has very little leverage over President Trump when it comes to finalizing this deal, is left really with Lebanon as the only card at his disposal. And so it is not surprising to me that he is using that at this moment to disrupt these negotiations.
Can Netanyahu use that card to prevent any peace deal at all? Because he's been very open about the idea that he doesn't think any peace deal with this particular regime is worth doing.
So the Trump administration can certainly, as we saw them do with the initial ceasefire with Lebanon, can certainly pressure Prime Minister.
It is now 7 a.m. Do you want to reply?
In 2 miles, take exit 251B on the left for I-85 north toward Georgia 400 Greenville.
And probably have some success in holding them back. That being said, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear that it will continue to take action in its national interest in the region as it sees fit. And so it's really more of a question of whether President Trump is willing to put himself on a collision course with Prime Minister Netanyahu at this point, or whether he'll let Netanyahu continue to potentially disrupt this deal.
The president instead is sticking up for Israel and saying to Arab nations, listen, recognize Israel, as a few of you already have done. I recognize, as we heard from Franco, that Arab nations are unlikely to do that right now, but isn't there something in this for Arab countries?
Long term, there is certainly something in it. The Abraham Accords were a very positive development. That being said, I think that this is somewhat of an own goal. Saudi Arabia has been crystal clear that absent a pathway to statehood for the Palestinians, it will not normalize. And so President Trump has essentially laid something on the table that has zero chance of success.
Jennifer Gavito is a former senior State Department official, now a senior advisor at the Cohen Group. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
In half a mile, take exit 251B on the left for I-85 north toward Georgia 400 Greenville.
Do you ever wish you had superpowers? Invisibility, teleportation, reading people's minds maybe? Well, mangrove trees are living that dream. Their superpowers are no big deal, supporting life on Earth and fighting harm.
Go past this first exit and take exit 251B on the left.
Climate change. Mangrove trees help us eat, breathe, and survive Mother Nature's tumultuous storms. But even superheroes have weaknesses.
Half of mangrove forests are at risk of collapse by 2050, according to the UN.
There is a silver lining. With the help of communities, including a small fishing village in Cambodia, mangroves have been making a comeback. And in doing so,
he told us, we are helping the whole world.
I'm Emily Kwong, host of Shortwave from NPR. Join us in the MCU, the the Mangrove Cinematic Universe. Hit the button below now to listen.
In 2 miles, use the right 2 lanes to take exit 87 for Georgia 400 north toward Buckhead coming.
A painting of George Washington kneeling in prayer has been shared repeatedly this year by the Pentagon, the Department of Labor, the Department of Homeland Security, and the White House. NPR's Neda Ulubi reports on that image as part of NPR's series about the changing relationship between church and state.
At the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., a visitor from Fort Worth, Texas, admires an imposing oil painting called The Prayer at Valley Forge.
It's beautiful.
Rhonda Bolash takes it in. The country's first president, head bowed, cheeks ruddy from the cold, drenched in golden light.
George Washington kneeling, praying to our Lord, and you just see that he's asking for help. It's amazing.
This painting is beloved by some evangelical Christians.
A man of deep faith, Washington sought divine guidance from God.
Like the ones who made this documentary about the artist Arnold Freeberg and his most famous work.
George Washington led a tattered, scraggly band of some 12,000 soldiers into a winter encampment in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania.
But the part of the story about Washington praying is a legend, says Thomas Tweed. He's professor emeritus at Notre Dame University, and he's written extensively about American religious history.
Shortly after Washington died, a clergyman who wanted to establish that the president was of good morals.
In half a mile, use the right 2 lanes to take exit 87 for Georgia 400 north toward Buckhead coming.
And was pious, made up a story. Most Americans know the story about the cherry tree.
You know that story, right? Young Washington says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie."
That's in the same book.
So this best-selling book was filled with fictionalized stories or mythologies about George Washington.
Use the right 2 lanes to take exit 87.